I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm George Vagopoulos.
And this
is... Do you remember what the show is called?
Oeuvre Busters. Busters. Ooh, we screwed that up.
It's difficult to harmonize.
Because we didn't do the Elliot Goldenthal theme as opposed to the
Danny Elfman
theme, because Danny Elfman did not work
on this
film.
This piece of shit?
All
All of our fan can't see you putting that in.
Film.
Scare quotes.
It's good to be back.
It is. It feels like it's been forever since we recorded.
We recorded a Batman Forever episode, and now we're back together. George is in Burbank. Beautiful Burbank, California.
I've never seen so many movie stars and Looney Tunes characters just strolling the streets.
You got the Animaniacs to sign your bra.
It is. Yeah.
They
look really fucking haggard.
They look terrible.
That one guy is definitely
in that water tower for a while.
That one guy is definitely on heroin. I forgot what his name is, but he looked fucking strong.
I don't remember the Animaniacs.
I remember loving the Animaniacs.
Speaking of Burbank, California, home of the Animaniacs, and it's also the home of where the film that we're talking about today was shot. What film is that, George?
We are talking about Batman and Robin from the magical year of... I don't have the year in front of me. 1997.
1997. Good work.
A good year for...
Good year for...
I don't know.
Air Force One, I think, came out in 1997. That's a pretty good...
Get off my plane.
Get off my plane. And also Gary Oldman. Future
Gary Oldman
James
came out
Gordon.
in 1997?
Yeah, Gary Oldman. He had never been released.
He sprung from the brain of Wolfgang Peterson.
Hello, it's me.
And Wolfgang
Gary Oldman.
Wolfgang Peterson, my God, what have I given birth to?
Oh no, it must be destroyed. It's too good of an actor.
I imagine Wolfgang Peterson wakes up one morning, he has a really splitting migraine. He's like, quick, give me a hammer and chisel. And they crack open his head.
And then Gary Oldman
comes out.
He's like,
hello.
Oh, I'm going to play Winston Churchill one day in a movie that nobody saw.
But first, I'm going to be in your movie.
So we're talking about Batman and Robin from 1997. Directed by Joel Schumacher. This is the first film in this Batman franchise produced without the involvement of Tim Burton. It was produced by Peter McGregor Scott.
Ooh.
Written by Akiva Goldsmith.
Is that why they named it McGregor syndrome in the film?
Oh my God, maybe it is. That's an interesting. I already forgot that was a thing.
It's probably the only thing I remembered from the film. I pretty much tried to block the rest of it out.
Real quick, Akiva Goldsmith is a writer of films. He's written some real winners. No offense. He wrote The Da Vinci Code, The Dark Tower, I Am Legend, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, Hancock, which I think is actually kind of an underrated.
Never saw it.
Oh, it's pretty interesting. He also wrote the new Picard show.
The new what?
Star Trek Picard.
Oh, Picard.
So that's interesting. He was involved with that.
I was curious to see the show until you said that.
It is show run by my boy Michael Chabon.
It is.
Chabons!
I heard through his agent that he doesn't listen to us.
The music is by Elliot Goldenthal.
And then his agent was like, "Can you please stop sending me these emails? They're really harassing and threatening."
This is really annoying.
Who are you?
Watch the show. Music by Elliot Goldenthal, who I think I like the later Batman score. I like that it's different from the previous incarnation of it. And then edited by Mark Stevens and Dennis Vilkler. I actually think the action sequences in this movie are really, really well edited. I actually think the action sequences in this movie are pretty great.
I think the third one, the first action sequence, is pretty cool. Other than that, by the time the other ones kind of come in, I'm so already kind of checked out of this film that I was kind of like, oh yeah, these are just action sequences.
So do you want to give us a quick plot summary?
Did we tell you who stars in this? Obviously George Clooney's Batman.
Not first build. Arnold Schwarzenegger as Victor Freeze or Mr. Freeze.
Yeah. Do you know how much you got paid for this?
A shit ton.
$25 million.
Good job. Good on you. Arnold's very good.
Which is like $1 million per minute that he's on screen.
Yeah, exactly. Greg Clooney.
George
Clooney's shitty brother.
His non-SGA,
SAG, he's like the brother of the guy in The National who's like a fuck up that like can't get his life together. You know, Greg Clooney.
He's the non-SAG Clooney.
Yeah. We can't afford George. Get Greg.
We spent all our money on Arnold. let's get Greg Clooney.
No, peak ER career George Clooney, which I want to talk about in his acting because you can see the early career acting of George Clooney in this movie.
He looks like a baby.
Seriously,
I could not believe how fucking young.
Chris O'Donnell as Dick Grayson / Robin. Uma Thurman as Pamela Isley / Poison Ivy, Alicia Silverstone as Barbara Wilson and Batgirl / Michael Gough as Alfred Pennyworth, which I loved how much he was in this movie, even though
he's a central part of the plot.
I'd like to discuss a new theory I have about Batman, which is
Please.
late Batman films Alfred and how they're such fucking basket cases.
Like Michael Caine?
Yeah, Pat Hingle. Why are you ruining my...
Oh, sorry.
Pat Hingle as James... I wrote Godrun, but I think it's James Gordon. And then in the most thankless role in maybe any Batman film or any film of all time, Elle Macpherson as Julie Madison.
I totally forgot about her, yeah.
Yeah, because it's terrible. Do you want to give a quick summary of this movie?
So Batman and Robin team up to face... You better apologize. To take on... Mr. Freeze, who is attempting to steal a ridiculous diamond, in order to freeze Gotham City. Doesn't really make much sense. Eventually, also what happens is that Uma Thurman's character, Dr. Isley, turns into Poison Ivy after Dr. Woodrow attempts to
murder her. Played by John Glover, who's fucking great.
He's great in this. After she kind of uncovers that he's attempting to develop super soldiers for all of these notorious evil dictators across the planet, which is great too, because it cuts to the scene and you see kind of like, here's our Castro looking guy, like here's our like USSR looking guy.
This movie is ripe for a political discussion,
and we'll get there. So that super soldier obviously is also Bane, who is a very weird kind of like character in this film. And long story short, Batman and Robin are kind of driven apart by Poison
Ivy's love juice, love cloud, love potion,
pheromones?
Love cloud, a new clone from Oeuvre Busters.
And we also get Alicia Silverstone, as you said, as Barbara Wilson.
Barbara Wilson,
yeah.
niece
who shows up, who's niece of Alfred.
Alfred, who, by the way, is suffering from Alfred is suffering from a syndrome called McGregor syndrome,
which is what also Freeze's wife had, and what kind of also led him to attempt to save her, but in the process of trying to save her, he fell into a vat of really cold stuff. Fell into a vat of ice or something, and he turned into Mr. Freeze.
This film is very clearly inspired by the 1960s Batman show, as Batman and Forever was before it, and the work of Dick Sprang, who is a comic writer and illustrator in the golden age of comics, and actually really interesting guy. This is not the forum to talk about it, but sort of an interesting guy, and played a major role in DC Comics. And
long story short, Batgirl eventually finds out who Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson really are. They team up and they defeat Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. And they don't kill either of them, which is kind of interesting.
They don't kill either of them. The villains
do not die.
And they sort of, if there's something interesting about this movie, is that there is a bit of a redemption arc for Mr. Freeze, which I think is interesting.
Because basically he's kind of like a very sympathetic character. And I think Arnold actually does a decent job in this film, aside from all the terrible puns.
Oh no, he's amazing. Stop it. He's so great at delivering those
He's
puns.
never fucking... I mean, he obviously knows what he's doing.
Arnold is a sneaky, funny guy.
Yeah, he could be funny. And I think some of that comes across in this. But man, the puns are just terrible.
So let's
So wait, sorry, let's just say the redemption thing too. So basically what happens is at the very end.
This is the longest plot description for like
No,
you're
not.
just going.
No,
Just keep going.
We're doing
We're doing fine. Don't worry about it. I quit the podcast.
Where this is why Liam moved 3,000 miles away from me. Where because Alfred is suffering from McGregor syndrome. Batman asks Freeze to help him find a cure, or at least for stage 1 McGregor syndrome is what Alfred has, and he basically gives him the antidote. And he says, take 2 of these and call me in the morning.
Take 2 of these and call me in the morning. It's great.
And Alfred is saved. The end.
Let's get rid of let's get to the elephant in the room of this. George, what do you think of this movie?
I hated this.
You don't like it?
I fucking hated it. Although we also briefly spoke about how we would talk about this film. And to say,
I mean,
to not just spend an hour shitting on it.
Universally acknowledged as a piece of shit.
And one of the worst films potentially of all time.
And that's ridiculous. That's people who say that haven't seen enough movies, and it's a stupid thing to say.
Quick, name one worst film.
The Rise of Skywalker.
Oh my god! Hot take.
But let's.
As I sip from my Star Wars mug.
I think we should. That's a Force Awakens.
Liam
mug.
has a Force Awakens mug that I'm literally drinking coffee. It's great.
Let's talk about the fact. So we've sort of agreed that. And I think universally people have agreed that this is a crappy movie. I'm I'm gonna go ahead and say that we're there with that. We know that's true. That's fine. Blah 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 blah. Fine. But I'm gonna go ahead and say that, and I was chatting with our previous co-host Sean Mannion about this via Twitter the other day, or not via Twitter, but via actual conversations. And I wanted to offer up something that Sean said that I think is very, 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 very good. Which is, what did he say exactly? Here it is. I was talking about the fact that, and I was trying to find this tweet. I was talking about the fact that this movie is interesting and it sucks. Sean's point was it's interesting because it sucks. And I sort of said something to the effect of one thing I like about these films and I miss about that I think is somewhat wrong with the Nolan and the later Nolan films, and I like those movies too, is that serious superhero movies, and to quote Sean, are honestly more of an absurdity than the goofy dumb shit like Batman and Robin. And I think that this movie is not very good, but there are really interesting things about it. And I think ultimately it gets a bum rap because it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that politically it's important that it doesn't take itself too seriously, because I think the Nolan films, as good as they are, have like more problematic points of view than this does, and are ultimately like set off a chain reaction in terms of superhero that leads us to the logical conclusion of Joker. Like, Christopher Nolan legitimized superhero movies, and maybe superhero movies do not need legitimacy. And I think it's created a problematic culture that I wish we didn't have to contend with.
Well, legitimacy, though, here just simply means serious, or at least kind of highbrow or high-minded.
People that watch them and take them seriously as like works of art. And in some ways, sure, fine, I get that. But like,
I think the second Nolan film probably did that more than the first one because of Heath Ledger.
Yes, well, yeah, I think that's true. And I also think that like he was attempting to make like a crime opus. He was trying to make Heat. It's very well acknowledged.
That opening scene is incredible.
So, this movie isn't great. Let's talk about some things. And I don't know if you want to respond to
No,
what
I do want to respond to that.
And
I think I said right before we started recording, we spoke about this a little bit, and this is why, in an interesting sort of way, obviously the films, you have to kind of process them chronologically because that's how they were released. But it's interesting to think again about how the Burton films are the synthesis of basically the Schumacher films and the Nolan films, even though they came out first. And by that, I mean that, again, they're this perfect mixture of the camp with the seriousness in a way that the Schumacher and the Nolan films are not. So if the Schumacher films were attempting to like completely exercise the seriousness or the darkness that you find in
the
Burton films, then the Nolan films are totally about eradicating the campiness that are in the Schumacher films.
Right.
So in a weird way, the Burton films, even though, again, they came out first, are the perfect synthesis of the two visions of this character that came out afterwards.
Well, and I think that you made the point, I think, in a previous episode or maybe just in conversation, that they're not particularly good. And I actually haven't even seen Justice League, but there's a point in the movie where someone says to Superman, to Batman, what's your superhero power? And he says, I'm rich,
yeah.
Which is like also a great bit of humor in like in the world that we live in now. I don't think there's a perfect take on the character, because I think that the Burton films may want you at times wanting something more serious. Like, I definitely think there was part of me that when the Nolan films came out and I was really into them, well, the first two at least, I was like, this is missing from the Nolan films. But now when I watch the Burton films, I'm like, God, or I watch the Nolan films, I'm like, I really miss what the Burton films had to say. So like we're sort of talking big picture here, and that's not necessarily like the best approach to this. But it definitely got me thinking that I think these movies get a bad rap, and they're bad. They're not very good. I think we've kind of agreed on that, but there is some things that I think are interesting about them, and I want to talk about what those are.
And we will talk about them, and there are interesting things about this, especially I think the Poison Ivy character, or the villains in particular.
Yeah, so I think the movie's commentary on millionaires and climate change is actually pretty good.
But let me ask you something. Don't you also think that in some sort of way you are, not you generally speaking, or kind of like, or people are trying to find something redeemable in something that is just simply aesthetically bad? And that doesn't necessarily mean that
I don't agree that it's aesthetically bad.
There isn't something interesting here.
The production design in this movie is off the charts good. It's great. It's as good as the Burton films in a very, very different way.
It is. I'm not saying that overall that redeems a terrible screenplay.
It's a bad screenplay.
Terrible acting.
Who's bad in the movie?
I think Alicia Silverstone is really bad.
Alicia Silverstone is not very good. It's not that I don't want to say she's bad. I find her and Chris O'Donnell stuff to be very unconvincing. I find Chris O'Donnell to be less convincing in this movie
than the previous
than
one.
He was in the previous.
We do find out right away that he's horny as fuck.
Horny as fuck. Wants to fuck.
And he just wants to fuck.
And I think horniness is a really interesting. And
horniness is always
homoerotic. Horniness is always really interesting, and there's a lot of homoeroticism in this movie that was criticized when it came out, and we can talk about that a little bit. I think Schwarzenegger knows what movies he's making. I think he's great.
Agreed.
I think Uma Thurman is great in this.
Agreed.
And even though she's like she's like fighting uphill against a terrible writing.
And the Bane character, and not that I care about the Bane character as like, oh my god, this isn't authentically Bane. I just mean what they do with that character is so
but what's
stupid.
Again, what's more absurd? This kind of like meat-headed guy that repeats the last word he hears, or like, oh, it doesn't matter who we are. What matters is our plan.
No, don't put the fucking character in the film. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, fine. Well, then don't put him in any of the films because he sucks. He's great in the comic book.
I love Tom Hardy.
I love
Tom Hardy.
Yeah, but that movie. Oh, I can't wait till we talk about that
movie. I remember that movie being shit.
It's shit. It's an astonishing like epic achievement with so many things wrong with it.
I remember hating it, but it's been a while since I've seen it. I've only seen it once.
I've seen it 2 or 3. I saw it 3 times in the theater because I wanted to find something to like about it.
So what's interesting about this film? Should we start with the villains?
Let's start with the villains. Go.
So Uma Thurman, eco-terrorist, love it.
Eco-terrorist. I wrote
totally
down in my notes the villains in this movie are right.
Well, they're almost always right.
They're almost, but they're particular. Well, in some ways they are and they aren't. Like the Riddler just hates Bruce Wayne. Okay, that's kind of right. He's fine about it. He's
I was primarily thinking about Killmonger and Black Panther, who you're sitting there and you're kind of hearing what he has to say.
Well, he's not the villain, and the movie acknowledges that.
Oh, I totally disagree. I mean, he's there. Yes, there is a little bit of. It's been a while since I've seen that as well. Questions about like brotherhood and how they're related and how they're perhaps not as different as they might appear to be. But
well, it's also very particular to the kind of the themes that movie is dealing with in terms of like, I would say like a Pan-Africanism versus sort of a whatever Panther represents. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
in that context.
Yeah, sure. But also again that he's still clearly the bad guy that needs to be.
And I think it's a little out of the pay grade of what we're talking about here because I think. So when we talk about what are ultimately is every Batman movie kind of about? I think it's ultimately about like a vision for Gotham. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot. Like the most interesting thing about Batman comic books is Gotham as a city, right? To some extent. And there's actually, I know this is going to sound ridiculous, but to your point, there's actually I don't know if it's an amazing scene, but there's the beginnings of a great scene in this movie, which is the scene where Pamela Isley / Poison Ivy confronts
Dr. Woodrow.
Confronts Wayne.
Oh, Wayne at the end, yeah.
Not at the end.
Sorry, not at the end.
Halfway
through.
It's like midway through when he's introducing the new telescope. And she basically says something like, no, like...
She says, don't look to the stars, look to the earth.
Don't look to the stars, look to the earth. The people are the problem. And his response is, people above all else.
Yeah. Well, he also says something about, she shows him a vial that has the Wayne logo on it from... these experiments that they were doing, obviously, like somewhere in the jungle.
In the Brazil.
And he says something like, oh, we're no longer invested in that because we weren't ideologically, which I think is exactly what he uses.
Aligned.
We weren't ideologically aligned with what was going on there.
Which was the turning of people into super soldiers.
I believe so.
Yes, it was exactly that. And she says something to the effect of, but like humans are ruining the planet. And his response is people first. Bruce Wayne is and this isn't why he is, but one of the things that this movie does better than the others, there's real, I don't know if there's class commentary, but Gotham in this movie is portrayed as a city of millionaires and wealthy people who go to fancy events, and Bruce Wayne is a piece of shit in this movie. Like more so than the other movies.
Yeah, I mean also
like whether it's intentional or not, he sucks.
Do you think that also comes across in the way he treats Elle McPherson's character?
Well, there's a point and God bless George Clooney, and I don't mean to be negative now because I don't want to do this in the show, but this is I think
he'll survive.
A problem of the writing. And God bless George Clooney. The writing and the direction is that at some point someone's like, when are you going to get married, Bruce? And he has this line where he's like, marriage. You want to help me out here? And you're like, oof, this is terrible. Yeah, he's terrible to her. He's kind of terrible. His arc in the movie is to learn to trust and be part of a family. But he's just like, seems like really, I think one thing that they did with the Val Kilmer is they tried to make him kind of like and whether you think there's a billionaire kind of philanthropist, which is like,
right.
You know, we're in the throes of Mike Bloomberg's presidential campaign now, so we're thinking about that. But one of the things that makes Keaton so good as Bruce Wayne, at least to me, is that he's a total weirdo.
Yes, yeah.
And an oddity.
He
and
wears
almost
it
like he's not,
well.
He doesn't seem, his wealth is not something that he's like flouting or thinks a big thing. Whereas I like increasingly, and Val Kilmer is somewhat similar, but like the production design and the design of this movie like really suggests his opulence and his wealth in a way that like it's almost like he's new rich in the later Batman films, where in the early ones he's like old rich in a weird way.
No, you're right. I mean, it's interesting to think about also what Wayne Manor looks like in the first film. So, for example, one of the first scenes is when Vicky Vale walks into that room and there's like all that weird armor.
Yeah.
And that's obviously kind of also meant to represent Batman's own armor, but also just how all that stuff looks like grotesque and so fucking weird. And you're right, in this one, there's a certain kind of lavishness to everything.
Yes.
That weirdness is kind of, it's not there.
Yeah, and he's, I think that like...
But it looks bland,
too. It's funny because I think he's like, there's never been a less sexualized Bruce Wayne than the Bruce Wayne that appears in this movie. He's just kind of like devoid of any... And like...
But the Batman is sexualized.
Yes, and that's interesting too. But it's not like you don't see like... One thing I like about the Keaton character in the first one is that like he's kind of a regular looking dude and like he gets it on with Vicky Vale in that movie, and then he gets it on with Michelle Pfeiffer in the second movie. There's no getting on. No one gets on in this movie. Like,
well, they try to get on.
They try to get on, but it never really happens.
They're just constantly edging.
He just seems so like desexualized a little.
Well, it's funny because isn't he also like walking around a lot in the mansion like robes or what look like really long? Like he's kind of almost like doing like a Howard Hughes kind of thing.
Yeah,
I mean, not always, but
and it's a weird performance. Clooney was shooting this on the weekends while shooting ER.
Huh.
And like so they were like moving him from set to like he'd shoot 4 days on ER and then he would shoot Thursday, Friday, or he'd shoot Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then like be back at ER on Mondays. And like he's just like, there's one thing you can see in his performance. Clooney, because of the rate that he had to, and you see this in Three Kings too, in his early career, the rate he had to memorize dialogue, you could see him remembering it. He'd like look down a lot. Like a lot of his early performances are characterized by him doing a lot of looking down and not looking people in the eye because he's trying to remember dialogue. And like he was open about that. And you can see it in this performance. This is like before, Clooney's pretty good in From Dusk Till Dawn, which came out 2 years before this. But he's just, maybe it's that he's so fucking famous or that he's an overworked actor, but he never really he never stops just being George Clooney.
Right,
which I think
he doesn't inhabit the character
later in his career. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because he's no longer on ER. But I like the idea that he has like these like etch-a-sketch like shoes that he has to like keep on writing his like his dialogue and he keeps looking down.
I like the idea that he's like, wait, I'm Batman.
I'm Batman.
Who am I? Forgot the line.
He's like, I'm Batman.
Wait, Robin.
Line. My etch-a-sketch is smudged.
And then he freaks out and smashes his trailer, and he's like, "You had 8 whiskey sours. Why didn't you have 4 whiskey sours?
God damn it!
God damn it!"
So you're gonna go home tonight and you're gonna kill yourself. That scene gets really dark really quickly.
Oh, that's a good scene. I watched it last night. We should talk about that movie at some point.
We should talk about the fact that fucking our man Bong won all those Oscars.
Bong. Yeah, we live in a post-Parasite winning 4 Academy Awards world. It's incredible. Yeah, I think that there's something to this movie. I don't know if it's commentary, but Joel Schumacher seems to be saying like the villains are more fun and they're right about like the planet. All humans need to be destroyed. And then there's this billionaire sociopath who's like, no, we have to put people first. And he's like surrounded by all these like sycophants and reporters, and he doesn't trust anyone in his life. Like, I don't know if it's intentional, but to me it feels like a little bit of commentary.
Maybe, potentially. I mean, I think obviously now, especially now with what we know about where the planet's heading.
Yeah.
And
obviously everything's great.
Everything's great. Everything's just going according to plan. But also,
the planet's all like, you had 8 whiskey sours last night.
I know. What the fuck? The planet's like, tonight I'm gonna fucking kill everybody on the goddamn surface of this planet, and it's gonna be so much better. And obviously we've known about this for like decades now.
But this
as
movie
more and more has been
explicitly in
revealed.
1997 was like, people are terrible.
But it's funny.
It's a kid's movie.
It's a kid's movie, sure. No, totally. But that's where I think also, like, for example, these kind of conversations, like the things that Sean were saying, and if I had more time to think about it, I maybe would have something more constructive to say. But again, the implicit critique is always subverted by the fact that these are in fact villains. So the other thing also that you find out is that, or you find out at some point, Poison Ivy tries to kill Victor Freeze's wife, who's in suspended animation. And obviously that clearly makes her a villain in a way that Freeze is not. So again, like the film doesn't in any sort of way suggest that she's in the right, even though we know, for example, that paying attention to what's happening to the planet and to what human beings are doing to the planet is important, and reversing that shit is really important. But again, she's fundamentally a bad guy. And also the fact that the film is
sounds like to me you're labeling her as the bad guy.
I am. But also the fact that the film is clearly, as you said, right? Like this is like a film that was clearly made for kids. And it's clearly made to like sell action figures.
But there's some subversive stuff going on in it. Like, for kids.
All right. Like what?
Well, the fact that the movie, I mean, again, I see your point. Like, I think that sometimes leaning so hard on what the narrative wants us to think does not take away from what the film might say. Again, like we talked about this before. Yes, the lesson is taught that like they're bad guys in a certain context. And like it is the idea that like people are more important than plants. Whatever we might think about that, like the idea that she's saying people need to be destroyed to save the planet is a subversive thing. Now, does she ultimately lose? Yes, but it's still in the film, and it's still in a film for little kids. And like, I guess in a way you're right. It's teaching the lesson that she's wrong and he's right because she's the quote unquote bad guy. But the fact that the movie even goes there is really interesting. And I think Schumacher deserves credit for not. So one thing I've been thinking a lot about is like what legitimizes a superhero movie, like what makes it legitimate. And I think that the movies that we're meant to take most seriously in these kind of franchises is the origin story. When there is a superhero movie comes out where it's like, witness the beginning. Like I remember when Batman Begins came out, it was like, holy shit, this is a new take on Batman and we're going to see the origin again. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And like, whether we need that or not, it's a very clear way that they sell these movies as legit. I think a great example of that is the Joker, where it's like, oh, we're really going to see the origins of this character. Whereas like in The Dark Knight, he doesn't have an origin. It's one of the subversive things about The Dark Knight is that the Joker doesn't have an origin story. And I think that that's fucking awesome in the context of that movie. And it's a little perverse to me that the lesson learned from that movie is like, let's make a Joker origin story. But we can get there later. So that's something that's sort of legitimizes these movies. And I think to Joel Schumacher's credit, he doesn't really care about that. He wants to make the movie he's going to make. But one thing that he does that makes it more interesting than it needs to be is have the characters have points of view. Yeah. And a lot of the time in superhero James Bond movies are a great example of this. The villains don't have a point of view. The best James Bond film is, in my mind, is Skyfall, because that guy has legitimate beef with the British government. And I think it's great that like they created a character who's like, it's not just like, I'm going to use my ray gun to destroy the planet because I'm a cackling villain. And
well, that's his origin story.
I think that this movie does a better job of actually I think this is a better movie than Batman Forever. It's a more interesting movie than Batman Forever. It's a clearer take on the character. There was a great piece in the AV Club that we'll link in the notes where he's like, at least this movie has a point of view. Batman Forever is this weird Frankenstein that has no point of view.
I think that's fair. I would say it's more interesting, sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, because I think Schumacher had more control.
I mean, I was also more interested in the sense of like, again, trying to process the shittiness of this and thinking about, again, what do you do with a spectacle this size
it's a huge movie
that costs this much money? The budget was something like $200 million.
Between 160 and 225 million, and it only made 240.
And to think about
domestic, I think.
I mean, obviously, the most obvious way to think about that is to think about again how terrible capitalism is. Sure. That all of that money, all those resources, all that went into making this film could have been funneled somewhere else for something way more productive.
Well, but you can say that about it. I mean,
but aside from that crime, yes, of course, there's worse crimes. To just think about again,
like sees every Marvel movie in the theater.
Oh my god, I can't fucking wait for what's the next one? Black Widow.
Well, that should be okay. Florence Pugh's in it. Little Women, what's up?
There's 4 more coming out.
Oh yeah, you didn't like Little Women because you're a Philistine.
That's not
it's one of the best movies of the year.
I didn't like it. I was just like, oh, this is good, but I'm not like, this is the greatest film.
There were like 3 possible masterpieces that came out this year.
I thought you hated that word.
4. I haven't seen Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but
can't wait.
But Parasite, Uncut Gems,
Rise of Skywalker.
But yeah, I mean, Little Women is amazing.
No, Florence Pugh is great. I love her.
She's great. I still haven't seen Midsommar.
Oh, it goes somewhere. It goes places.
Yeah, I know. I read the plot description. I was like, nope, too scary.
Oh yeah,
too
just
scary.
about the spectacle of it all, and just trying to make sense of it and what kind of a hot mess this is. I think also, I don't know, man. I don't know. Just again, like, this is Schumacher's vision. I get that it should be campy. I get that it should be fun. I'm not against those things, but I'm also just at this age where I can't watch something where, like, literally every 30 seconds I'm getting like a bad pun and a bad joke about like a bad credit card or about like.
That's pretty
I want
stupid.
A car. Chicks dig the car.
Chicks dig the car.
His
line reading, poor Chris O'Donnell. His line reading on that is bad. I want a car. Chicks dig the car.
Chicks dig the car.
So let's talk a little bit more about. So this movie was very badly received. We're talking almost more about how the movie was received, and like, to be clear,
which is
the movie
fair.
is hard to watch. Like, it's a 2-hour movie. It took me at least 3 hours to watch it because I definitely had to stop at one point and vacuum because I was like, I need a break from this thing.
I think I watched it in 2 sittings.
Let me give you a quick. I'm going to read a little bit of this from the Wikipedia article that came out. So very early on in the film, one of the first things you see is Batman and Robin putting on their Bat and Robin gear, and there's very specific shots of their bat cracks and bat cod pieces, and it's
their nipples. I think you see the nipples,
and then you see the nipples, yeah. And so, if you listen to some of these reviews from the late '90s when it came out, so like I want to let me just read this real quick. Some observers thought Schumacher, a gay man, added possible homoerotic innuendo in the storyline. James Bernardinelli questioned the, quote, random amount of rubber nipples and camera angle close-ups of the dynamic dudes' butts and back crotches. I think I stole back crotch from him without realizing it. LA Times wrote that the addition of, quote, the addition of nipples and a codpiece to Batman's costume may be the film's lasting legacy. Chris O'Donnell felt, quote, it wasn't so much the nipples that bothered me, it was the codpiece. The press obviously played it up and made a big deal, especially with Joel directing. I didn't think twice about the controversy, but going back and looking and seeing some of the pictures, it was very unusual. Clooney, who admitted to purposely taking a subtle gay approach to his portrayal. That's a weird thing for a straight dude to say. Later said, Joel Schumacher told me Batman was gay. Now, some of those articles, some of those quotes maybe they're not homophobic, but they don't read great now in context. Like, oh, why would they do that? It's weird.
Well, I mean, what's also silly, sorry to interrupt, but what's also silly is that obviously the relationship is already latently homoerotic.
Sure. And I think that God, it's great that Schumacher did it and leaned into it because Nolan never would. There's like, if there's any less sexual filmmaker in the world, it's Christopher Nolan. And if there's ever one that is like more heteronormative, it's Christopher Nolan. He's heteronormative AF.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just think it's interesting.
It is kind of, when you think about it that way, it is interesting to think that that the homoeroticism in this film even got made.
Yes. Well,
that it's so like literally in your face.
We joke about this all the time, but this is a pre-9/11 movie. I think that is not to be underestimated because I think the culture took a swing in a different direction after.
In terms of seriousness.
Yeah, in terms of seriousness after 2001.
But not necessarily in terms of, let's say, portrayals of gay couples or, like, if anything, things are much better now.
No, but
on screen.
And I don't say this agreeing with it, but I think that there's a way to contextualize or to watch that and to just find it harmless and funny. That you see like bad dick and whatever in Bat Crotch. It's super campy and like hell yeah.
And it's supposed to be disarming.
Fine. Really quick quote from Joel Schumacher. Joel Schumacher stated, quote, I had no idea that putting nipples on the bat suit and Robin's suit were going to spark international headlines. The bodies of the suits come from ancient Greek statues, which display perfect bodies. They are anatomically correct. I think it's really interesting because I do think it's interesting how in this film, especially when you first see them before Robin says, I want a car, chicks dig the car, they are treated as like these gods, these mythic. Yeah.
Because again, then the cameras are like panning also upwards a little bit, right? While they're getting like suited up and you see them in bits and pieces. Yeah. And yeah, totally. Like they're the physiques, the contours of their bodies. Yeah, it's really interesting.
And I like how they then
godlike bodies.
They immediately undercut it with the I want a car because a Batman film that treats the characters like gods would come out about 20 years later. It's called Batman v Superman, and it has almost no sense of humor.
Correct.
So, I don't know.
I will say this, though. Schumacher, definitely better than Snyder.
I think these are more enjoyable. Again,
well, again, these are
they're
weirder.
almost like a postmodern Batman. Those films are almost like they're just like so extreme in terms of they don't have they just I can't believe they exist in the form that they do.
Even the Snyder ones? Or,
yeah, they're just. I mean, I didn't see Justice League.
It's so fucking bad.
Yeah, well, we're gonna watch it. A couple other. So I think ultimately like it's a noble. I actually think it's a pretty noble effort. I think this is a hard thing to pull off. I think the veil of seriousness makes it a lot easier for Nolan to get away with the things that he gets away with. I mean, that whole thing is the whole thing is a balancing act. Like it's when Dark Knight came out, it was, and I like, don't get me wrong, that movie blew my fucking mind. But like, it doesn't have this sense of humor to step back and go like, this is ridiculous at any point. There's maybe a couple of joke lines.
I'm sure there. I don't remember it entirely.
It's like, remember the scenes in The Dark Knight where Batman talks for, you wanted to prove that nobody deep down, everyone was as bad as you. You were wrong. People aren't that bad. And he just keeps talking and you're like, stop. Because it's really hard to take it seriously. Because I think Christopher Nolan was like, lean into the bat voice. Yeah. Whereas in the first one, he only does it like a couple times. And it's like the first time you see him and he's like, swear to me. It's great. But at a certain point, those movies get like close to absurdity and then pull back because they're much more conservative movies than the movies that Joel Schumacher made. Like they don't have the guts to wink.
Yeah.
And the wink is good. The wink is great. Even the Burton films wink. Where does he get those wonderful toys?
Yeah,
you know?
Of course.
I don't know. I honestly think I appreciate what Schumacher was trying to do more than I appreciate what Nolan did.
Oof. I mean, again, I think there's one.
They're not good.
I think there's one thing to be again. I think there's one thing to be said about intentions. I think there's one thing to be said about.
That's what I'm saying, though.
Yeah, but also again, you have to again contend with the art object as an art object, and even though let's say.
Okay, calm down, Heigl.
To quote Kant.
Oh my God.
No, I think again you have to just be like, well, yeah, maybe there's some kind of like interesting political commentary here, and it's there. Some of it already is there. Some of it does make it into the final product.
Yes.
But man, this film is just fucking bad. Like even if we had like 10% less puns.
Why is it so bad?
If not,
why is it so bad?
Puns. How about that? How about really bad jokes? How about none of these jokes are funny for anybody above the age of 12?
Okay. We live in an imperfect world.
How about like, do I really need another scene where Batman throws Robin into a pile of ice cream or whatever the fuck it is that he throws him into, that green like mush?
Oh yeah,
which I think it might have been an ice cream factory. Yeah, because Mr. Freeze. Or do we need
what killed the dinosaurs, George?
The Ice Age. Or do we need? I mean, where's the lie? He's right.
That's true.
I
mean, dinosaurs never existed.
Yeah, of course. Do we need like again this really like over the top, horny like Robin, which is like so absurd?
Yeah, I mean, so is a guy whose parents get murdered, and he's like, I need to become the Bat. And straight, like all of this is absurd.
Yeah, of course. But then again, so is a film about, I don't know, this family that like infiltrates this rich family's life and then finds out that there's people living in the basement.
Yeah, but that movie's aware that it's absurd.
Of course, but I'm saying that's the point. So is this film, but it doesn't do anything well with it, or it doesn't do anything good with it. It doesn't like.
In case you're wondering, we were referencing
Parasite.
Four-time
like
Oscar winner Parasite, Bong Joon-ho.
It's like
I would watch the fuck out of a Bong Joon-ho Batman movie. Holy shit!
Well, it's not gonna happen.
No, he won't do it, and God bless him.
Because Bong's like, I'm not fucking doing that. Yeah,
I wonder
good for him.
I just see what he will do. Let's move off this political thing, but I would say that
were we
just
talking
because
about politics?
I think that that maybe the interpretation of a movie built solely like to think about it's to contend with something as an art object. The portrayal of characters as good or bad is something that the movie does, and ultimately, consciously or subconsciously, that's a kind of commentary. But again, the ability to include in a children's movie a character saying something like, well, human beings are the problem, is pretty great.
So there's
remember how I said we weren't going to talk about this?
There's this literary theorist by the name of Jack Halberstam who wrote this book called
I know Jack Halberstam.
Yeah, who wrote this book called
The
Queer Art of Failure. And in it they write about how there's certain kind of children's films like Finding Nemo, Chicken Run that have all these kind of like subversive elements to them.
Yes.
So the reading in that book is that these films are in some sort of way, again, subversive, politically progressive, because they are children's films.
Isn't Chicken Run about like unionizing and
Something like that. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Mel Gibson's in it.
Anti-Semite, very famous anti-Semite. Mel Gibson's in it. As a chicken, of course. As an anti-Semitic chicken. And the argument in that book is that these films are in fact so subversive because they have all of these subversive.
Yes.
But the point also that Halberstam doesn't make, and that I think is also applicable to this, is that when those messages are couched in a product like this that is supposed to be absurd, that is supposed to be so considered kids entertainment, the form of it in some sort of way, to me, also dismisses the politically progressive aspects of it. Because again, you are supposed to walk out of that thing, whether or not, let's say you agree or disagree with Poison Ivy. You walk out of that film thinking to yourself, I just watched entertainment. It was fun. It was a stupid entertainment. It was a stupid kids film. That's all it is. So any messages that may or may not, let's say, be politically progressive are couched in this. Again,
because it's a kids film.
Because it's a kids film, or the medium is so, again, not to be taken seriously in this particular form.
I see.
That you dismiss anything of, let's say, serious critique in it. Just like these films, like oh, you're supposed to watch these. You're supposed to get these messages when you're a child. You're supposed to get them in a children's film, but eventually you grow up and you forget all those messages.
It's a little
you
bit
leave
of
that
the
shit
idea
behind.
Of like if you're young and you're like a liberal, you have
exactly that bullshit
or if
idea.
you're young and you're if you're young and you're conservative, you have no heart. If you're old and you're liberal, you have no head. That bullshit right. Thing. Can we talk about a tweet that you tweeted from the account?
Yes,
real quick?
please.
Because maybe people will be interested in this. Maybe they won't be. I don't know.
I might have been drunk when I did this too, by the way, so I don't remember.
You tweeted on February 8th at February 8th, 2020 at 11 o'clock at night.
I feel like I'm in like
a photo
I'm talking to somebody in
of
HR.
Alicia Silverstone saying, "Listen, this whole master-slave thing, it's really ridiculous." And you tweeted the exact moment at Liam G. Billingham finally made sense of Hegel's master-slave dialectic. Hashtag Batman and Robin. Hashtag Hegel. Hashtag German idealism. Let's talk more about this, George. What do you mean?
Well, no, it's just this interesting moment in which, obviously, the Hegelian master-slave dialectic.
What is that?
It's the process by which the slave comes to their own realization, their own kind of value of who they are in relationship to the work that they're doing for the master. So it's this kind of like flipping for a very brief moment of the power dynamics between the master and the slave. So like typically, obviously, it's the master, of course, who has the power.
Master?
The titular master. Ooh, if only. Wow.
Yeah.
Should bring that to bear too.
Movie is now available
Paul
on
Thomas
Netflix.
Anderson's. I should go back and watch that film. It's so good.
Good.
But so that obviously in this, again, dialectical relationship, the master is initially or is in power, but obviously the master is beholden to the slave's work to make the master who or what.
But it's only a momentary.
So in the film, it's interesting. Yeah, I think one interesting thing again about the film is that Alfred does play this role that perhaps a kind of central role that this version of Alfred doesn't play in any of the previous three
similar
films.
to Michael Caine in The Dark Knight Rises.
Isn't there also, correct me if I'm wrong.
I won't bury another Wayne. I won't do it.
I won't bury another Wayne.
Anyway, so he plays a bigger role.
Yeah, is there am I misremembering a moment in the oh no, maybe I'm thinking about DuckTales. Remember the butler in DuckTales?
So, do you think
Sorry, no, seriously. There's
yeah.
So there's an episode in DuckTales in which the butler, I think, is abducted by aliens, and I shit you not.
That's definitely not Batman.
And they say something like, "Oh, aren't you like a slave back home?" And he says like, "No, I'm a butler because I want to be a butler." And I'm like, "Ooh," but then I was like, "Is there a moment in the Batman animated series where the same thing happens with Alfred?
There might be.
Where he's abducted by aliens." No, I'm kidding. But where he kind of says like, "No, I do what I do not because I'm a slave to capitalism, but because I want to be a butler."
So are you saying that it's potential that that the Batman and Robin is smuggling that they're smuggling a Hegelian master-slave dialectic commentary?
No, not at all.
Okay, I'm just saying because it's a children's movie. Fuck off.
That was my reading of it.
Let's talk about some other things.
Hey, George. Yeah, go fuck yourself.
Hey, George, go fuck yourself. Let's talk about a couple other things.
Hegel right
here. Bruce Wayne's a piece of shit in this movie.
Correct. That.
I like we never see the murder of his parents.
Correct.
But I do appreciate that the movie flashbacks like Clooney will look up and he'll be looking at like a desk or something, and it will show him reading a book with Alfred or something
little,
like that.
Little
I
Bruce.
like those moments a little bit. I think they're really interesting.
Well, it makes it more evident that Alfred is obviously the father figure,
right?
The only family that he has, which he explicitly says.
And it also is interesting because we're watching all these kind of like superhero movies and how they can attempt to give a character who's kind of become one note or a part of the popular conscious a character arc in each film, and I appreciate that they do attempt to do that in this movie. It's not just a superhero thing. Batman is not very interesting in this movie.
He's more interesting than Bruce Wayne.
I think that Bruce Wayne is just kind of the perpetual bachelor. We're going to talk about Batman Mask of the Phantasm in a few weeks, which I think has one of the most interesting portrayals of Bruce Wayne of any of the superheroes. But like, he's kind of a little bit, both as Batman and as Bruce Wayne, a little bit kind of like somnambulant in this movie, if that's the right word. Like just
sleepwalking?
Yeah, he's just not really, I should have just said sleepwalking. Fucking elite as fuck.
Pretentious fuck.
It just doesn't really do much for me, and I'm still trying to figure out if there's some kind of unifying thesis about Bruce Wayne or the portrayal of him in the way that we kind of thought about Alpha Beta Phil Hoffman in season 2. I don't know what it is for Bruce Wayne yet, but this film doesn't really give me that much to go with, except that this is like him as shittiest billionaire.
Well, again, yeah, you don't have none of these films explicitly, except maybe there's a gesture towards it in that last Nolan film, but about the critique of him as a billionaire. Like the obvious critique of him as a billionaire. We still haven't gotten that.
Well, and I think it's interesting how in the Nolan... I do think that Bruce Wayne in the Nolan films is interesting. And I do think having him as like a playboy in the first movie is pretty
I just imagine like the ultimate Batman villain would be like somebody called like the tax man. Just some like bureaucrat goes up to like Batman. Batman's like, who are you? It's like, oh, I work for the IRS.
Do you mind? I need to look at some of your taxes.
Yeah, you have like these offshore accounts, dude. Like the numbers aren't adding up. How dare you? I'm not supposed to give you these other books.
We retweeted.
Those books are in the Cayman Islands.
Retweeted. You're not supposed to see those.
You're like, no, but
my bad accountant will deal with that.
Your rate here, like it's weird. Your percentage wise, your butler is paying higher taxes than you are. That's neither here nor there. You clearly have a mental illness. I'm going to lock you up in Arkham Asylum.
There's a guy, Paul Kruger, at Not Like Freddy on Twitter, who was tweeting a Justice League political conversation earlier, and there's Superman saying, we can all agree that there's never, ever, 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 ever been a good billionaire. And then Batman doesn't say anything, and then Superman says, ever. It's pretty good stuff.
It is really good stuff.
Robin is poor Chris O'Donnell, just doing all he can. Not much.
Laughing all his way to the bank, though.
I do think the idea of them fighting over a girl is pretty interesting, and there is a little bit of a funny scene.
Kind of misogynistic.
Yeah, but it's still funny. There's a scene where he's like, "I can't believe we were fighting over a girl," and Batman says. Robin says something like, "Nice roses, though," and Batman says, "Yeah, good stems. Oh, nice stems, good buzz." And you're just like, Jesus, this is so stupid. But Clooney's funny, and he commits to it. And
there's some laugh. I forgot there was another moment too where I laughed.
Clooney's one of those awful, talented, handsome men who's also quite funny, and it's infuriating. Fuck that guy. This movie is not very good, but I think we should give it a little more credit than.
Well, again, I give it credit for it attempting to do some interesting things. But yeah, failing miserably. Man, and also like Alicia Silverstone's character, they don't really do much with her. I know they give her that motorcycle scene with the race.
Oh, again, the kind of problematic gang portrayals that exist in Batman Forever with these kind of like Day of the Dead. I do appreciate that there's that continuity. There's a couple things that are interesting about the movie in terms of continuity. You're right, they don't really do anything with her character, but I think if you recall in Batman Forever, Bruce Wayne at one point says to Dick Grayson when he's leaving, the circus must be halfway to Metropolis by now. There's a line in this movie where Batman says, "This is why Superman works alone."
The very beginning, one of the first lines.
Interesting. Real quick, I found a documentary on YouTube that's like the cinematic saga of The Dark Knight, and it's an incredibly earnest documentary,
right? Which
was made after the fact, where they're talking about what went wrong with the movie, but they interview Val Kilmer, and he was like,
"Not The Dark Knight, you mean?"
After the Batman and Robin. But the movie is the series is called the Cinematic Saga of The Dark Knight. And they're kind of talking about what doesn't. They interviewed George Clooney. He's like, yeah, the movie doesn't work. But at one point, Val Kilmer didn't know they were making another movie because they fast tracked it. Normally, there were 3 years between.
Yeah.
And I think it's a better movie if Kilmer had come back.
I mean, again, I think so many bad things with it. Like, would Kilmer really have?
I don't know.
It?
I think Clooney.
Weren't they going to make a fifth one? There was a fifth one planned.
Batman Unchained.
Batman Unchained, and obviously because this was not a success.
This did not well. They waited till 2005, I think, to reboot
Unchained. What a terrible.
It's a terrible title.
What about Batman and Robin and Batgirl?
Batman and Robin and Batgirl and Aquaman. But there's a line very early in the movie where Superman says, or Batman says, "This is why Superman works alone." And I'm really curious what a Joel Schumacher Superman would look like. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, again, probably better than the Snyder ones.
Oof, take that.
Take that, Zach.
Yeah.
I know you're listening, Zach.
We're
coming for you.
I do not like this movie. I think
Same.
it has more going for it than we give it. It is a hard movie. So I watched this on I watched Batman Forever on a large television set. I watched this on a small 10-inch tablet because that's the situation I'm in right now. And I do not think I did the movie any favors watching it on a small screen. Oh, my wife is so hard. No, I think that it maybe would work better in a movie theater.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But maybe not. I'm never going to pay money to see this in a movie theater.
Oh, I would.
I mean, I paid money to fucking rent it, and I kind of feel bad. Kind of feel ripped off.
One theme that we didn't talk about that this movie is about is trying to stop death, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Batman or Bruce Wayne wants to stop Alfred's death.
From McGregor
Mr. Freeze
syndrome.
is trying to stop his wife's death.
Yeah, good point. Poison Ivy's trying to stop the death of the planet.
Death of the planet.
Important death of all.
Yeah. I mean, there's things that this movie's going for. It just doesn't ultimately work. And
I just love that you keep like apologizing for it though, or like trying. Like
I wish it were better. I really wish, because I would have loved to kind of episodic.
Who doesn't want to root for like a good movie?
Cheesy,
a good,
totally.
Like Batman movie.
So we're gonna wrap this one up. Next up, Batman: Mask of the Phantasm. Then we're gonna jump back and talk about 1966 Batman before making our way into the Christopher Nolan Batman films.
Yeah.
There's not that many Batman movies.
We're running out of Batman movies.
We're running out of Batman
but not Batman adjacent
movies. Stuff. Yeah. But we'll be back soon, and thanks for listening, and we hope you had a ice time.
Yeah, don't give us the cold shoulder on social media.
Oh yeah, please rate, review, subscribe to the show.
I thought you were gonna make another bad cold.
We have 22 shut up. We have 22 reviews, and they're good. I can't think of any more great ice jokes. We can always use more ratings, reviews, and subscriptions. And if you're only tuning in now, we have 2 seasons. Previous one about John Cassavetes, whose film Husbands, which inspired this entire series, is now coming out on the Criterion Collection in May.
What? Oh, that's what you were saying.
Yeah, I was yelling that to you while you were in the shower.
Yeah.
Which is weird because I was in the shower with you.
Yeah.
And then our second season was about
Philip. Liam, I'm right here. Don't fucking yell at me.
Gosh, that's the water.
Can't enjoy the shower.
Oh, I'm trying to enjoy the shower. And then our second season was on Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, the one.
And we're planning our 4th season, which I'm very excited about.
Of course, yeah.
But we have to figure out if that's ultimately where
we're going to do the films of Ed Wood.
We're going to do the films. Ed Wood. We're going to do the films of. We're
going to do the Tires Animaniacs series.
Ooh, that would be a lot. Jesus Christ! All right. Well, I was Liam Billingham,
and I was George Frigopoulos,
and this is, and will be
Oeuvre Busters.
What killed the dinosaurs? I can't think of any of his other. Fuck. Okay. Bye.
Bye.